So today's focus is going to be on finding quotients of whole numbers by using partial quotients. And when we talk about partial quotients are going to be similar to partial products, where they are the parts of a quotient as we go through and divide. And so we're going to kind of use the concept from the area model that we did yesterday. But we're going to take what we did with the area model and we're actually going to put it into an equation so you can start seeing how the standard algorithm is going to work. So I'm on page 258. And so it says a theater has 375 seats. So I'm going to go ahead and do 375 seats that are arranged in row with 15 seats in each row. How many rows are in this theater? Let R equal the number of rows. So what we have, if I write this as an equation, I'm going to do 375 divided by 15 equals R. Or if I want to look at it as a multiplication equation, I can do 15 times R equals 375. And you'll notice that I did a dot here instead of doing an X. So when we work with variables, we don't use an X for multiplication. You're going to use a dot as a symbol for multiplication, because if I were to write it as 15x R or 15 times R, I don't know if this is an X or I don't know if it's an R. So we switch the symbol that we use when we multiply, and we multiply by using the dot or a coefficient, which we'll talk about when you guys are in 6th grade. But I just wanted to point out why I used a dot instead of an X. Okay, so to solve this, what I'm going to do is you'll notice that I wrote my equation differently. I put it inside, I call it the box. I put it inside the box. Some people call it the house. But what I did was I took my dividend, which is the number that comes before the division symbol, and it goes inside the box. It's not always going to be the larger number. In this case, it is, and in the work that we're doing within this topic, it will be the larger number. But sometimes in math, your dividend, or the number that's being divided, is going to be the smaller number. So I always say you always put the dividend inside the box instead of saying the larger number, because it's not always the larger number. And then 15 is my divisor, so it's going to go outside the box. And I'm actually going to rewrite this and bring it down, and you'll see why I brought it down here in a second. So I'm going to start by using partial quotients. So I'm going to look at how many tens I need to multiply 15 by. That's going to get me near 375. And so I'm going to use some of my number sense to help me with that. So I'm going to start by just looking at the first two digits of 37. And I look at my 15 facts and I say, okay, 15, what multiplication fact of 15 is going to be near 37? Well, 15 times 2 is going to be equal to 30. That's near 37. So if I did 15 times 2 tens, or 15 times 20, my answer is going to be 300. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write that 20 up above. And I'm going to put the 2 here in my spot of the 7, because 15 doesn't go into 3 2 times. 15 is going to go into 375 20 times. So I write it up above the tens place value. So here I'm lining up my tens place value. Then I'm going to multiply, which I've already done. 15 times 20 is going to be 300. I'm going to subtract, and I'm left with 75. So this right here, I multiplied by tens. Here, what I'm going to look at when I subtract whatever value I'm going to have is I'm going to multiply by ones. So my partial quotients are going to be what I multiply the divisor by in the tens place, and when I multiply the divisor by in the ones place. So 15 times a value is going to get me near 75. So you may have to do some guess and check when you're doing this with your facts. I know that 15 times 5 is going to be equal to 75. Okay, so I'm going to put 75 right here. I subtract and I have nothing. I have no value left over. The 5 I'm going to place up above. So this right here, the 20 and then the 5 up above, represent my partial quotients. Here's my partial quotient for multiplying by the 10s. Here's my partial quotient for multiplying by the 5s. So I write the 10s first, and then I write the 5s. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add them together. So 20 added to 5 is going to be equal to 25. So my answer for how many seats are in each row, going back to that original one where it said let R equal the value, R equals 25. So I have 25 rows within the theater. Okay, go ahead and move over to your guided practice. Let's take a look at 259. Now, I expect that when you guys are doing this to see the work done on your guided practice as you guys are turning it in. Okay, so show one way of using partial quotients to find 231 divided by 11. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up my problem where 231 is going to go inside the box and 11 is going to go outside the box. My first step is to look at how many times I multiply 11 by to get to 231. And so the answer that I'm going to do is if I multiply, so let's do some patterning here. If I multiply 11 by 10, I'm going to get 110. If I multiply 11 by 20, I'm going to get 220. If I multiply 11 times 30, I'm going to get 330. So just by doing some multiple of 10 work right here, I can see that I have to multiply 11 by 2 10s or by 20 to get me near 231. 330 is too big, 110 is too small. So I'm going to write above the 3, I'm going to write 20. Okay, so 11 is going to go into 231 20 times. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that first partial quotient. So I'm going to subtract, and I'm left with 11. So now I have to look at how many ones. So just make a note, this was my tens. How many ones I need to multiply by 11 by to get to 11? Well, the answer there is going to be 1. So I'm going to write a 1 up above my 20. Okay, and when I do that, I'm going to multiply. 11 times 1 is equal to 11, and then I'm going to subtract. So this right here is how many ones I multiplied 11 by to get to 11. 11 minus 11 is 0. So then I add 20 plus 1, and I get 21. So my answer for 231 divided by 11 is going to be 21. So this piece right here, this division work is what I expect to see. If you're doing extra work off to the side, I don't necessarily need to see that thinking, but I do need to see you modeling this partial quotients process. Okay, number 2, how can I use estimation to check that my answer is reasonable in problem 1? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a problem. So I got 21. So I'm going to do my estimation in blue on here. So I'm going to round 231 to 200. And I'm going to round 11 to 10 and then divide. So I'm explaining how I can divide 200 by 10 and jump over here to get 20. And then I do the comparison. 20 is near 21, so my answer is reasonable. So this is my explanation of how I got it. It is a reasonable answer because 21 is near 20. All right, let's take a look at problem number 3. So again, we're using partial quotients to set this problem up. If you need to do this on a separate piece of paper, please do these problems on a separate piece of paper and then turn it in with your math practice today. So problem number 3, I have 15 divided into 210. So I need to look at how many times I'm going to multiply 15 by how many tens to get me near 210. Well, 15 times 2 or 15 times 20 is going to be 300. So I'm only going to be able to get 110 in. And so when I get 110 in, erase that and write that smaller so I can have room for my partial quotients. When I get 110 in, 15 times 10 is going to be 150. I'm going to subtract, so I get 0. 11 minus 5 is going to be 6. 2 minus 1 is going to be 0. So I have 60. So this right here, that is my first partial quotient, okay? So it's partial quotient for tens. My next value that I'm going to do is I'm going to do 60. So I look at how many times I multiply 15 by 1, because 10 is going to be too big, because 15 times 10 gives me 150. So I look for how many times I multiply 15 by a 1's place value to get to 60. And 15, I know that 15 times 4, so I'm going to write 4 up above. 15 times 4 is going to get me to 60, so I'm going to subtract. If I didn't know, I'd have to do some guessing and checking off to the side. So I would do 4 times 5 is 20, regroup the 2. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is going to be 60. So my answer there is 60. This right here is my partial quotient for my ones. So you'll notice that my partial quotients, I write my 10 partial quotients first, then I write my 4 partial quotients, and then I'm going to add them together. So my answer is going to be 14. So my quotient for this problem is going to be 14. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at your next problem. Your next problem, I have 13, and I'm dividing that into 286. So I look at how many 13s I'm going to do. So if I did 13 times 10, I'd get 130. If I did 13 times 20, I would get 260. That's enough right there, because 260 is really close to 286. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to subtract. So there's my first partial quotients. I found that partial quotients by multiplying 13 by 20. So I'm going to write the 20 up above the 86. When I subtract, I'm left with 26. Okay, so now I have to figure out how many ones I multiply 26 by to get to 13. So I'm going to do 13, and I'm just going to take off my tens here. And now I'm looking at 13 times 2. That gets me to 26. So I'm going to do 26. So I'm going to subtract there, but I have to make sure that I record that I multiplied 13 by 2 to get that partial product of 26. And then I have 0. So my answer here is going to be equal to 22. Okay, so I'd like for you guys to move into the next video for problems 4